What's up, Buttercup? It's Dev from Mtg, aka Angelface, looking good over here today. And you know what? We are just now coming off the end of Mythic Championship 7. Literally, it just finished up like 5 minutes before I pressed record on this camera, so I know what I'm talking about. But I'm not going to spoil the winner of the tournament, because some people actually do go back and watch it on their own time. Every time I say who the winner of the tournament was, there's somebody in the comments like, don't spoil it for me, dude! So I'm not going to do that. But what I will say is that these Jeskai Fires decks just didn't do as good as a lot of us anticipated they would at the beginning of the weekend. Now, there are obvious excuses for that if you want to make excuses. You know, I'm not one for that, but you could always say that, well, a lot of people came equipped with main deck Thrashing Bronzodons and main deck Ether Gusts and all that to game plan against these decks. So they were the most known quantity going into the tournament. A lot of people had tools to take them down. But honestly, I think it's way more simple than that. I think it's just the Fires decks weren't playing Angels. Well, how about that theory? It's the premise of this video. So today, get ready to say hello to my favorite Fires deck in the format. That joke is worse than I thought it was going to be. Anyway, roll the intro.
Yo, I'm sorting through some heinous haters like a pooper scooper. I'm just trying to take my life like a Koopa Trooper. I'm Double Mario, that mean I'm super. And I'm freaking dangerous like a Chupa Cabre. Got them all day like a Kanye, but I'm way better getting cheddar in Monterey. But Jack, you don't know, man. You got the show, man. You want roast beef? Well, I'm Arby's.
And we're back. Anyway, angels. Big angels are for people with big brain-jels, it turns out. I've actually really liked this deck. I put it together as kind of a goof, it's a little bit of a meme and all that, but actually just wins games. So I figured you might want to see it, so I tweeted it out, and everyone was like, oh, that's a nice deck right there. And I put it on the Patreon poll, and everyone was like, yeah, let's definitely see that. So now I have to show it to you. Now, today we're going to go over the deck tech, show you what all's in the deck, the sideboard, the lands, all that, what you're used to and everything. But tomorrow, I'm going to put out gameplay of this deck so that you know that I'm not just like goofing around. This deck is actually like super serial. So now let me go through exactly what we're doing here, starting with the 4 Fires of Invention, which you already have probably met and discussed in great detail. You know what this card does? It just makes free mana for you, effectively. So there's no way that can go wrong. And because of the fact that Fires basically says that, here's a bunch of free mana, so long as it's past turn 3, do whatever you want with it, Chief. I'll look the other way. Just play nice. It turns out a lot of Fires decks tend to be built like extremely top-heavy. There's a lot of 4 and 5 and 6 drops because you really don't care what happens, so long as you actually resolve a Fires and then untap with it on the battlefield. So a lot of times you just see this glut of 5 and 6 drops in these decks, and honestly, I think that's where a lot of Fires decks are going to run into a problem. You have to drag them kicking and screaming into playing 2 and 3 drops, and a lot of them only play like 6 2-drops. So my idea for this deck was, what if we played 2-drops, not only played 2-drops in our Fires decks, but played 2-drops that can snowball into additional value once we get our Fires down? And that's what led me to Boros Angels, mostly because of Bishop of Wings. Now, there are a lot of things that are noteworthy about the BOW right now, but I'll start with the stat line because that is consistently one of the most impressive things about the card in this format specifically. Not only is this completely immune to Deafening Clarions in the Jeskai Fires quote-unquote mirror match, as is the rest of our team, but having a 2-drop that's immune to Deafening Clarion is especially relevant in a lot of these games. But this also takes a bunch of pings to take out with a Mayhem Devil, which is pretty relevant as well. And it can block a lot of stuff in the Simic Flash deck. It blocks lands that have been animated by Nissa, as well as Frilled Mystics, as well as tokens that are made by Nightpack Ambusher. It's just, you'd be surprised what all a 1/4 can do in the format. But maybe the most important part of Bishop of Wings is how much card advantage it can generate for us. And yeah, actual card advantage when it pairs with another one of these cards in the 2-drop slot. Remember, I said the premise of this deck is that I was trying to find a Fires deck that can snowball its early game drops into value in the late game. And I think there's kind of no better card at doing that, in white at least, and red for that matter, in this color combination. There's probably no better card at doing that than Dawn of Hope. And it's especially great in a Fires deck. Now, there are a few key things that Fires decks almost always want to do that lead me to believe that Dawn of Hope is actually a really good call for a Fires deck. First of all, Fires decks almost always want to have card advantage pieces in them because it doesn't matter if you've got your Fires down and all the quote-unquote mana in the world at your disposal. If you don't have any cards in your hand, or if you've drawn dead for a couple of turns and you're just getting lands or whatever, that can usually spell the end of a Fires player's game. So you got to find ways to find more cards and feed the fire, stoke the flames, games, as it were. So Dawn of Hope can be good for that. But you know what else Fires decks want to do? They want to do something with their lands. Because it turns out, yeah, your lands count towards Fires, but you're not actually tapping your lands for anything. Well, this gives you two different things to do with your lands. First of all, you can just draw cards, which we've already established Fires decks want to do. So if you've got a Bishop of Wings and a Dawn of Hope out, you play an Angel and draw cards off of it. If you've got multiple Dawn of Hopes out, you'll draw multiple cards off of that and hopefully be able to drop another free Angel to draw more cards and gain more life off of. That's how the engine works in this deck. But you can also just pump 4 mana into this if you got nothing else going on and make creatures that then can draw you cards because of the life gain. Whether they block or attack in, doesn't even matter if they die or not. They can still draw cards for you, and that's exactly what Fires wants to do. This gives you 2 different mana sinks in the Fires deck, and one of those mana sinks allows you to actually do stuff on your opponent's turn, which you can't usually do in Fires either. But what has it been, like 5 minutes? Are we 5 or 6 minutes into this deck hack and I haven't even talked about the Angels yet whatsoever? And it turns out if we're going to try and get value up of Bishop of Wings, Dawn of Hope, all that, then we're going to have to play Angels, and a lot of them too, which is kind of tough. We don't really have that many amazing Angels in the format, but considering this is a Fires deck, that gives us plenty of leeway at the 5 and 6 mana slots, at which there are a ton of really playable Angels. But I'll start with 3 copies of Feather the Redeemed. Now, there's actually like no Defiant Strikes or Samet Sprints or God's Willing or whatever in this deck to pump this card and then get back. I have been considering Defiant Strike, as a matter of fact, because it does kind of feel bad to play, a 1 mana spell with one of your 2 fire spells every turn, but this also guarantees that you draw a card every turn if you were to play Defiant Strike. So you can try it if you want to, but so far I've just been playing Feather as a 3 mana 3/4 flyer. Just the 4 toughness on this can make it a really formidable blocker in the current format, but it can also swing over really effectively too. It turns out that flying is just a really good ability to have in this format right now, because there's really not a whole lot of flyers. And even some of the flyers can't block, like Order of Midnight, for instance. It turns out that just playing a gang of flying creatures at the top of the curve is actually kind of good enough on its own. But moving on to the especially important 4-drop slot, because we want to be able to drop fires and drop something else on that turn, let's play all 4 Aurelia. Let's not mess around, because this is actually like the best turn 4 play this deck could hope to make after a Fires, and I want to make sure we have it as often as possible. So even though it's a legend, I'm going to play all 4 copies of it because it's so important to be able to drop this the same turn that you drop a Fires. Or if you don't get a Fires, just play this on turn 4. That's fine too. If you did get Feather on turn 3, this also kind of helps make up for the fact that we're not playing pump spells, because you can just swing with a 5-power Vigilant Feather on turn 4, which is pretty sweet, I hear. But other than that, this is just a 5 toughness flyer, which blocks a whole bunch of garbage, whether in the air or on the ground, and swings effectively too. But moving up to the 5-drop slot, we're going to play 4 copies of Angel of Grace, which looks slightly awkward, I could see you saying, because we can't play stuff at instant speed if we have a Fires out. Now, if we don't have a Fires out, however, we can still play this at instant speed, which is really important. If you didn't get your Fires on turn 4, then we'll flash this in on turn 5. Take the opponent by surprise, like 9 times out of 10. Almost no one game plans for this card. And there's going to be turns where your aggro opponent in mono red, or your Jund Sacrifice opponent or whatever, is going to try to kill you on their turn, at which point you just flash this into play, and suddenly you got a new lease on life. But even if you do have a Fires in play, this still isn't so bad. A lot of times, those same cat decks are going to try to kill you at the end of your turn, and it's still your turn. So you can still play this for free at EOT, which is important some of the time. Make sure you set stops whenever appropriate if you're playing on Arena. But in any case, once this is in the graveyard, you can just pay 6 mana to go back to 10 anytime, even if it's your opponent's turn. This gives you something else to do on your opponent's turn in your Fires deck, which can be really good, again, against those aggro decks or those Jund Sacrifice decks. Put yourself back at 10 and give them a whole lot more work to do to actually kill you. And while it's on the battlefield, in the meantime, before it goes to the graveyard, a 5-power attacker. It's got the right creature type. We're going to play it regardless, but there's a bunch of stuff this card can do for you. Now, another 5-power attacker that we're going to play is Light of the Legion. I only want to play a couple of copies of this card because it's not the best thing in the world, but if your opponent does remove it, well, suddenly all your other creatures, even your Bishop of Wings and stuff, get a little bit bigger, and that can make all of the difference. If you actually do play Light of the Legion for free, you're telling your opponent, well, if you remove this Light of the Legion, I still get a buttload of value. And on some boards, you're going to get back more power from this dying than you had while it was on the battlefield in the first place. So, again, 5 power flying attacker, good enough, but if your opponent actually does have an answer for it, it doesn't mean that their troubles are over. Now, I do still have a few more angels to show you, but I'm just playing one-ofs. All the rest of the angels in the deck. I want to get to 16 angels, but we do kind of have to worry about the top of our curve and how heavy we actually get here. So I'm just going to play one copy of Sephara Sky's Blade, which is the best of these, really expensive angels we're playing. But we've also got an Angelic Guardian and a Sarah's Guardian, because both of these abilities are actually really good. And again, they come on really big flyers that can do a bunch of damage in and of themselves. But obviously, having indestructibility on 2 of these is absolutely insane. One actually can give itself indestructibility when it attacks, along with all of our other angels. But in terms of Sephara, that just makes all of our angels indestructible all the time, except for Sephara. These are actually incredibly desirable abilities, and I love these 2 cards. But that doesn't mean that Vigilance isn't an important ability either, especially in the current standard, where we reach a lot of stalemates, a lot of slogs, a lot of I can't attack, because if I get attacked, the crackback will be too great. Well, Vigilance is a really underrated ability in this standard right now, where you can fly over for 5 damage and still have your giant flying beat stick up to block. That is actually super important at present. Now, we're almost ready to bring it home, finish up the main deck and all that, but I got to tell you about some removal real quick. We're playing 3 copies of Prison Realm, 2 copies of Justice Strike. I was on 1 for the longest time, but I think 2 is correct. Again, you're not going to drag us kicking and screaming into playing 2-drops. These aren't the only 2-drops in the deck. Obviously, there's Bishop of Wings, Dawn of Hope, and I've got another one to show you before we get out of here. I actually think playing 2-drops is really, really important for the Fires deck. I know it doesn't usually want to draw 2-drops on turn 6, but in a lot of cases, when you draw a Justice Strike on turn 6 or 7, you're actually really happy for it, especially in this particular format, where Justice Strike is just completely rife with really good targets. So I think Justice Strike is more than worth playing, whether you're taking out aggro creatures or you're taking out, questing beasts and Nissalands and Night Pack ambushers and such on turn 7 or 8. It's a good card one way or the other. Same thing with Prison Realm. This is going to take out a bunch of Nissas and all kinds of planeswalkers that might pose problems for you. And it's actually a fine card to, draw on turn 7 or 8 too. It's just a solid piece of removal. But if you drop it on turn 3, this will help you scry into your Fires or your Aurelia or whatever you're looking for on the next turn. Now, speaking of scries, there is one more card in this main deck, and I mean literally one, because I'm playing 1 copy of Charming Prince here, because I wanted one more early game play that, first of all, can keep us in the game against aggro decks, when you do come across those mono red decks and other fast stuff, like red black knights, whatever, then this can come down on turn 2, usually block and trade with a creature, and gain you 3 life back. But the scry is actually the biggest attraction on this card. Not only can it scry to make sure that we, draw something gassy on the next turn, which Fires always wants, but this can also gain life and trigger Dawn of Hope to draw us more cards. That can be important. Or we can just flicker or blink an angel while we have Bishop of Wings out and gain 4 life and start drawing cards off of Dawn of Hope. So there's a ton of stuff this card can do at pretty much any point in the game in this deck. So I figured we'd put in just the 1 copy, because I don't necessarily always want to draw it on turn 7 or 8 when we've got our Fires down, but I kind of do want to draw it on turn 2. Or have it in my opener, That said, again, I don't want too many copies, but I think the 1 is just enough, because when you do get it in your early hand, your opening hand, it can really help you out. But again, you're not too upset if you draw this on turn 8 when you're in top deck mode either. Now here's our lands. We're playing 27 of them because this is a Fires deck, and we're playing a bunch of 6s and even a 7-drop, so we need to hit our land drops all of the time. Good news is we've got Temple of Triumph in there to help us scry into important plays in the early games. Temples are actually kind of really undervalued in these Fires decks, but they are important cards. Plus, we've got Windscarred Crag in here to sometimes proc or trigger Dawn of Hope and draw us a card off of our land drop, so that can be really nice too. Plus, it keeps us in the game against aggro and stuff. But all things considered, we've got something like 17 red sources, which is plenty, and 22 white sources, because we want to be able to play Bishop of Wings on turn 2 as often as possible. So I think 22 will make it plenty consistent here. Now here's our sideboard, and there's not really much to say about it. We've got Devout Decree in there as a hoser. We've got Fry in there as a hoser. These are cards that we knew we were going to play one way or the other, although I don't think that Devout Decree is one of the best sideboard cards you could be playing right now. So I'm not going to play two of it, but it is a fine card one way or the other. Aside from that, there's Disenchant, which is great in the Fire's Mirror, but is also really good against the Jund Sacrifice decks because it kills Ovens and Trail of Crumbs and all that. So Disenchant is actually like sneakily one of the best cards in the format for sideboarding right now. But there's also Deafening Clarion when we need to bring that in against aggro. Again, our entire team is immune to it, so you might even want to find room in the main deck for a couple of copies of this, but I never did. That said, when it does get sideboarded in, there are going to be games where you take out your opponent's entire side of the table and give your whole side of the table lifelink. People have scooped to that. There's also an Ugin the Ineffable. You got a few 6-mana Planeswalkers in here because they're typically just going to be better than the Angels in a lot of games, but for very specific reasons they can be better than the Angels. Things like Ugin are great at taking out permanents that we don't otherwise have answers to. Again, things like enchantments in the Fire's Mirror or enchantments and artifacts in the Jund Sacrifice games. This can be really good at taking out all of those, and it can also function as another piece of card advantage for the deck. So Ugin is actually something that could worm its way into the main deck if you want to come down a lot of the Legion. I just didn't really want to play less than 16 Angels, but I think I have a sneaking suspicion you could get by on 14. But in any case, the only other card in there is Chandra, and the only reason that it's really in there is because Izzet and Simic Flash have become so popular over the last couple of days, and they'll only stand to become more popular, especially Simic Flash, after this tournament here this weekend. So this is a great card to get to against those decks because it can't be countered, obviously, and once it's on the table, it can do an awful lot for you, so I'm playing a few copies of that on my board, and that's pretty much as simple as that. Now here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 66, which is pretty decent, and even though I wouldn't go so far as to say this deck has as much raw power in the individual card choices as a deck like, say, Jeskai Fires has, I think this does have a much more cohesive and synergistic plan, which does aid it, especially in the early turns. Again, a lot of these Fires decks have been fairly resistant to play cards in the early game, but as far as this deck goes, you kind of have to get specific cards in the early game, which is a double-edged sword. If you don't get your Bishop of Wings down on turn 2 or 3, and then you drop your Fires and drop an Angel, it's cool that you dropped an Aurelia or whatever, but is it really as good as dropping some of the other 4 drops like Sphinx of Foresight that you could be dropping on turn 5? Let's say you still don't have a Bishop of Wings and you drop an Angel of Grace. That's not as good as dropping Cavalier of Flames. But if you do add Bishop of Wings or Dawn of Hope, or both of them especially, into that equation, well, then those turn 4 and 5 plays actually do get a little bit better than things like Cavalier of Flame, for instance, in most situations. I think that adding synergy to the deck in the form of a tribal theme does sound a little bit silly, but your early game is a lot better, and you have more things to do in the early game in this deck than your typical Fires deck, and you've got stuff you can do in the early game that then pays off in the late game, and the Fires decks don't usually have access to that kind of synergy, so if you're into it, give it a shot. This deck has been really fun and has won me a bunch of games, even in these mirror matches that I keep talking about. Not all is lost because we actually have a lot that we can do in the mirror, but we've got a lot we can do against Jund Sacrifice and the mono-red aggro decks and even the Simic Flash decks, which is definitely our worst matchup, but I've won more than one. So give this thing a shot if you want to. There's a link in the description to the deck on TCG Player. You can pick up any pieces that you need, and even though it again looks a little bit like a meme deck, I mean, everybody likes Angel Tribal. It's oddly one of the more popular tribal decks that I do. Whenever I do a tribal deck, people seem to just go crazy for Angels. Again, it seems like a meme tribal thing, but really give this thing a shot. Give it a chance before you just write it off, because again, I've had way more success with this deck than I ever imagined I would when I started putting it together. But again, it all started with the sort of theory of what if we actually had early drops that paid off once we started playing our free spells. And honestly, I think there's a lot of ways you could approach that theory, and I just wanted to have fun, but the theory actually did work out. Being able to play early stuff in the beginning of the game that then snowballs into more value once you get Fires down is actually a really effective way to play Fires, much more so than I thought. But with that, I guess I'm done with this one, except for all the pitchy stuff that I have to do. Please stick around for it. It helps my metrics. And I just gave you 20 minutes of delicious, stupid tech. So at least stick around for my pitch, right? All I really want you to do is like the video. Check out the Patreon if you're into it. $1 a month helps you vote on what decks you want to see around here next. And I might even say your name at the end of the video, like Spencer Pomeranz, the Patreon shout out for the video. You said you had trouble picking between the Boros Angels deck and a Commander deck. Well, don't worry. The next Patreon poll is going to be nothing but Commander decks. So get ready for that. You're gonna get a Commander deck here eventually. And if you're interested in that, make sure you go to the Patreon, link in the description, all that. Pledge your $1. You'll be able to vote on which Commander you most want to see when we do our next deck tech. But aside from that, and by the way, appreciate you, Spencer. You're a good person. Anyway, I really literally couldn't do it without you. So thanks for that. I need you. But in any case, do all the other stuff. Like the videos. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet, because it's not going to be long. These Theros Beyond Death spoilers are going to start coming out. You want to see those. So get at your boy. Hit the bell for the notifications. That does something, I hear. We're not actually quite sure. But in any case, I think I'm done for this one. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Make sure you spread love and be kind.